Hello everybody, and welcome to this video, which is kindly sponsored by Squarespace. Well, you've probably seen the library at this point. This is the pile of duplicates. So, well, I should probably do something to get rid of those. Fortunately, with Squarespace, I can. So, some of you may be familiar with Victula's Yard already. Currently, it's got my little poster of HMS Jupiter there. But now we're going to go and edit it, and then just go into add an item. And, well, there you go. New thing. It's a physical object. Because I'm going to add 4 books, but I'll show you how to do one. So fairly simple, select my upload picture, and there it is. And while it's uploading, I just put in the title. Now, obviously, there's all sorts of descriptions and stuff you can put in, but fortunately, you lot are a nice, bright, intelligent lot. You know exactly what it is once you've seen the picture. And then I just set my price, again, getting it to you from my collection for as little as reasonably can be done. I've only got one of them, so set the quantity to 1. Check out all the other settings. You'll recall from a previous demo I've done, I've already set the shipping up. Then I just go publish, and there you go. Now, in the week after you see this, I will try and get the rest of that collection up and running on here, but for the minute, there are 4 books ready to go, and I'll let you know when all the others are ready to go. So if after all these little mini tutorials I've been doing, you think you could build a website for maybe ideally naval history purposes, but you never know, you might want to do it for some other reason, then head over to squarespace.com/Drakenfell. You can get a free trial, and once you're ready, that little link will give you 10% off your first website or domain. So thanks once again to Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and on with the main show. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Introductions to Various Naval Subjects in the Library. We're in another separate corner of the library this time, as you can probably see by the background. Now, I have taken on board some of the feedback from the previous one. I've disabled the auto track feature on the camera, so if I vanish off the frame temporarily, unfortunately that's just a fact of life. But I will also try to show you the covers of the books in a bit more detail as we go through them. Now, we're in the section that just to my left over here is the US, German and Italian section. And just to my right here, we have the British and Commonwealth section. But we're not looking at either of those today. Today we're looking at this back shelf here. And this is one of 2 somewhat more general sections. And so we've got the full set of the 74-gun ship of the line tucking in the corner back there. But specifically today, in light of a few comments and discussions I've been reading, I thought we should probably have a look at good introductory resources to look at the interwar period, because the interwar period is very interesting. Obviously, we go from the 1920s with the Washington Naval Treaty all the way through the London Naval Treaty, the London Naval Treaty Mark II, and the very rapid subsequent collapse of said treaty system, and what everyone is doing in between. Now, that can be quite a complex time period. Just in terms of ship design, there are an awful lot of ships, an awful lot of revisions to different kinds of ships, and revisions to those revisions. So, you have the Leanders, but you also have the Arethuses, you also have the Didos. They're all of a family. You have the towns, the Crown Colonies, Belfast and Edinburgh, technically their own subclass. The US goes from the Pensacolas all the way through to the New Orleans in their heavy cruisers, and so on and so forth. But for technical histories of ships within specific navies, you're probably better off looking at specific books about those navies' vessels, like we were looking at before with the French vessels. But to understand the politics of what was going on and the general trends of why these things worked out the way that they did, there are a few decent introductory books to be had. So, first off, they're packed a bit tightly, so you'll excuse me for a second. We have 2 books here, both by John Jordan. It's featuring somewhat a lot. This is not actually sponsored by John Jordan, believe it or not. He just happens to be a very good naval author. So we have Warships After Washington, the development of 5 major fleets 1922 to 1930, which obviously looks at the 5 major attendees of the Washington Treaty, so US, UK, Japan, Italy and France, and title's fairly self-explanatory. Also shows quite a number of interesting designs that could have been and why they weren't taken up. I mean, on the back you've got a battle carrier. And it has an accompanying book, Warships After London, the end of the treaty era in the 5 major fleets, 1930 to 1936. Again, explanation fairly self-explanatory. It covers the latter part of the treaty era systems ending in 1936, which is of course when the treaty era system collapses. And again, very, very useful. The one that I have sandwiched in between those two is this one by John Maurer and Christopher Bell, At the Crossroads Between Peace and War. So the reason that's sandwiched between those two is because this book specifically looks at the London Naval Conference of 1930. So this is often seen as the big turning point. It kind of sets in a lot of the cracks that will be widened and widened until the Second London Treaty really kind of is a bit of a damp squib. But also an excellent one to look at. So you use sort of kind of warships after Washington as your introduction. Then ideally this one is your pivot point, and then your warships after London will take you up to the end of the period. So we'll try and get those back in. This is why hardbacks are sometimes better. They have corners. Now, right next to it, because as I say, I do have an organisational system, is these two. Now these cover pretty much the same period, but these are by Stephen Roskill, and they look at things from a slightly different perspective. So this one, Naval Policy Between the Wars, the period of Anglo-American antagonism 1919 to 1929, so it's the lead up to Washington and its aftermath. And then you have Naval Policy Between the Wars, the period of reluctant rearmament 1930 to 1939. So between the two of them, they form a slightly wider arc than Warships After Washington and Warships After London, because this picks up for the reasons why Washington was signed in the first place, the build up to it, and kind of what happens thereafter as well. But they are pretty decent books. As the back says, these are somewhat older, published in the 60s and the 70s, but they look quite in depth at politics, economics, etc. But as compared to the ones by John Jordan, whilst these do cover a slightly broader scope of time, they are largely focused on the Royal Navy and the US Navy. So if you're interested in the two largest fleets and the related subjects to them, these two would definitely be my recommendation and go to. If you're interested in the slightly broader picture with the Italians, French and Japanese, then John Jordan's ones are the ones to go for. And as you can see, there's a bunch of other books there, but for today, that's what I wanted to introduce you to. We can also, obviously, in future episodes, I'm not going to do this every week because that would be overload, I think, but we can look perhaps in another episode at the Royal Navy and why it can be actually very difficult to recommend a starting point for the Royal Navy for the time period the channel covers. Similar problems for the US Navy. The German and the Japanese navies are an interesting kettle of fish because there's not quite as much written about them, believe it or not, in terms of general histories. But I think for the Kriegsmarine, it's easier to recommend starter points than it is for the Japanese in English in easily available sources. The Italian Navy suffers from another problem entirely, which is that the vast majority of stuff on the Italian Navy, well, it's not in English, so very limited choices. But in terms of other parts of the library, obviously we've got the Japanese bits, we've got primary resources that we could look at. We've got very old resources to look at. We've got the entire warship collection series we can look at, as in the Warship Journal. We've got the other general purpose shelf. We've got other stuff on this shelf, so if you happen to see stuff roughly themed on this shelf that you'd like me to have a look at as well. And there I've got the Allied section, general reference section, the Age of Sail section, ancient warfare section. All of these sections I can look at and say, well, these are my recommended introductory starter books, if you like, and then you expand beyond that. So hopefully you've enjoyed the modifications I've made to this series, and hopefully you want to see a few more. That'll be the last one of this series for this month, but we might pick up with 1 or 2 episodes next month if there's enough interest. So let me know what you think about this. Obviously, I'm going very, very briefly over collections of books that I can recommend for you to read. The alternative, of course, is that I can also look at specific books in a lot more detail. There's obviously plenty of those to look at, so if you'd like me to do that, either instead or as well, then again, let me know in the comments below. And well, I had a quick look at the runtime for that little review, considering we were only looking at a few books very quickly, and I thought probably best to give you a little rundown of one of my other favourite parts of the library. So we're at yet another wall. As you can see, we've got a few more different kinds of books out along here, but the main thing I want to highlight from this section is this series, the Warship Journal series, starting out at volume 1, and these earlier ones can be somewhat harder to get hold of, admittedly, going through all the way to current edition 2022. Now, I cannot recommend these highly enough. They are absolutely excellent books if you can get hold of them, and they cover all sorts of interesting topics. And the reason why they come so highly recommended is because for a naval enthusiast, there's going to be something you're interested in. Now, granted, if you're not interested in the interwar treaty period, the stuff we were just talking about probably is not much interest to you. If you're not interested in the French Navy, what we talked about in the last episode, probably not interested in much interest to you. But these contain articles from all over. So let's pick, that's 2016. So 2016, I swear I actually don't think I've ever spoken to him or corresponded with him. I swear he's not sponsoring this series, but yeah, John Jordan also edits Warship at the moment. I don't know exactly when he took over, sometime around here-ish. But yeah, anyway, he's the editor. So you'll find, you know, back in the day, really like high-profile naval authors who have since passed on, like D.K. Brown, are in these earlier bits. But so we're looking at Warship 2016, and you may recognise some of the contributors. So you've got Hans Lengre, Stephen McLaughlin, Vince O'Hara, repeated guest on the channel and very welcome, and many others. And so, contents of this, we have the colonial sloops of the Bougainville class. So those of you who saw my 5-minute guide on the Bougainvilles, some of that information came from here. There's also a colonial sloop, the Eritrea, which is Italian, I think, and also, you know, discusses the roles of sloops. There's a section on the Asashio class of Japanese destroyers, and that's a more modern thing, I think. Then there's Naval War in the Adriatic, Part 2, 1917 to 1919, which is a collaboration between Enrico Sanucci and Vince O'Hara, which would suggest you would probably need 2015 to read the whole thing. But of course, the Adriatic, not a topic that's widely written about in English, in the English language naval history world, but definitely something to be interested in. Then we have another one, Post-War AIO and Command Systems in the Royal Navy. I'm sure that'll be of interest to someone, but it's after the period the channel covers, so I'm afraid I'm kind of hands up on that one. There's, for those of you like the Russians, the Soviet Fugas-class minesweepers. Then Steve McLaughlin, I really actually like reading this article, particularly in this book, in this particular edition, Divide and Conquer, Divisional Tactics and the Battle of Jutland. So if you've heard me on the dry dock talking about things like Admiral Sturdy's idea for a pincer attack and so forth, a lot of that is based in part on the research that Steve McLaughlin has done in this article. And obviously all the references, this is the other thing, they all give references so you can follow it down further. Here's a Marmite topic, modern littoral surface combatants. Again, just as well I don't cover modern stuff, but there you go. Going back into the time period that we're looking at, the Chinese flagship Haichi and the Revolution of 1911 by Richard Wright. The battleship Courbet and Operation Substance. So that's one particular operation that Courbet undertook. And then it finishes up with, in terms of articles at least, because there are notes, book reviews, which are also really handy, and some galleries. The last article is The Flatiron, the coastal defense battleship Tempête. So that's a French one, in case you haven't guessed. So yeah, it gives you all these articles just in the one book, and most of these later ones are still relatively readily available. Once you get past around about here, going further back, they become harder to get. And I must acknowledge, you know, I think I had about 90% of the collection, but various subscribers were very kind in able to facilitate me filling out the whole collection, which I'm very, very grateful for. There are some weird ones though. 2016, 2015, I think 2012 and 2008 for some reason are really hard to find. You know, you can find loads of copies of 2009, 2010 and then 2008, good luck. But there, never mind, there you go. At least that's when I went looking for them. So that's a little bit of an extra bit. Warship Journal series, definitely recommended. As you can see, started off being published by Conway's and also published by Naval Institute Press, and nowadays published by Osprey. So thanks very much again, and see you in another video.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.